and we should be all set, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. I am Senator Ruth Ward from Senate District 8. And if you're here, you are observing the Senate Education Committee on two bills. Today, we'll be holding a meeting of the Senate Education Committee. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the Education Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously in this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start a meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with them, which is required under the right to know law. I will call the roll. Senator Hennessy.
Good morning, Senator Hennessy from Littleton, and my children may come in and out of the room with me today.
Senator Ricciardi.
Good morning, Senator Ricciardi. I'm home alone in my home in Bedford.
Senator Khan.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am in Keene, in my home. My wife is elsewhere in the house.
Senator Prentice.
Good morning, Senator Ward. I am home in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and my husband is elsewhere in the home.
And I am Senator Ward, and I am in my home in Stoddard, where we have freezing rain, and I'm alone in the room. Welcome all. We'll start with Senate Bill 145. And Senator Khan is the sponsor of the bill, and I will ask that he introduces the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this opportunity to present Senate Bill 145. If you were following the Senate calendar last week, this bill is much in line with Senate Bill 135, which this committee did not hear. It went directly to the Finance Committee. So for some, this will be part of this presentation will be a little redundant. However, there is a lot of overlap between what is contained in Senate Bill 135 and in Senate Bill 145. Both of them aim to stabilize the level of funding for public school enrollments and the average daily membership and attendance, which is the basis for calculating aid to public schools. You'll notice in Senate Bill 145, beginning in Section 2, that the average daily membership in attendance is defined for fiscal 22 as being the greater enrollment between the census date in fall 19 and in fall 20. And this is necessary because there's a very unusual drop in enrollment for fall 20 that is over 7,000 students. And then there are differentiated aid categories, but primarily because of free and reduced lunch and a waiver issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that qualifies schools for free and reduced lunch, as opposed to requiring the families complete the forms for qualifying their students for that program. As a result, the free and reduced meal program is 10,000 students fewer than they were a year ago, dropping from 45,000 to 35,000. So part one of the bill works to allow the higher of the two fall census figures to be used for the calculation of an adequate education in fiscal year 22. For both bills, whether it's Senate Bill 135 or Senate Bill 145, this move requires a $46 million add to restore those enrollments. But let me make clear too, that the level of funding needed to stabilize enrollment with the higher enrollment between those two census years still is $56 million less than the fiscal 21 current appropriation. Say that again, and I'll say it slightly different way. The fiscal 21 appropriation for an adequate education is $1,024 million. The funds necessary to support part one of SB 145 with the highest census figures is $968 million. And the difference is that we would be spending in fiscal 22 on adequate education, $56 million less than we are in fiscal 21. There are two other adjustments then that are made in Senate Bill 145, which are unique to this bill. One is it recognizes that in the beginning of a biennium, there is a inflationary adjustment. That inflationary adjustment for this coming year, fiscal 22, is 1.4%. And it costs $15 million to distribute that small inflationary increase across 177 school districts. It winds up being a relatively small amount, not in all school districts, but a smaller amount of 15 million being distributed across 177 districts. And part three of the bill discusses fiscal capacity disparity aid, something that in this current year cost $49.9 million. But because property valuations have gone up between fiscal year 20 and 21, the cost of extending those same levels of fiscal capacity disparity aid in fiscal 22 is only $36 million. That aid goes to 80 different communities, and they are the 80 communities in this state that have the lowest property valuations per pupil. Communities that receive the greatest amount of aid are Rochester, $3.3 million, Derry, $2.8 million, Berlin, $1.4 million, and Manchester, $2.6 million. But make no doubt about it, there are a lot of small districts in that number of 80. They aren't all large. It affects the town of Ware by $915,000, Swansea by $635,000, and a town as small as Troy with $438,000. In order to minimize this fiscal impact, the math in this bill subtracts the biennial inflation, waives it for 1 year. And so the net increase between this bill and Senate Bill 135 is $21 million. And with that $21 million increase, the total cost is $989 million for inadequate education grants to all school districts for all kids for fiscal 22. And mind you, again, this represents a $35 million decrease from what is appropriated for fiscal 21. Town deliberative sessions are, and we're all starting to attend these, they're turning up increases like $5 and $6 per thousand, so that the total education property tax that some towns are facing are like $25 per $1,000. And while we would not be adding inflationary increases to towns where the total tax rates are less than $1, and there's a whole bunch that have tax rates that are $5 or less. Fiscal 21's fiscal capacity aid went to 100 towns. And of those 100 towns, 63 of those towns were able to lower their tax rates. We're talking about the lowest property valuation communities that have the highest tax rates in order to try to spend an equitable amount on their opportunity for an adequate education. And they were able to reduce their taxes because of an increase in state appropriations in fiscal 21. It worked. The idea worked. Berlin was able to drop its tax rate by $3.16, just for an example. So with fiscal capacity aid and a 1-year waiver of inflationary increases, the state would wind up spending $989 million on adequacy aid, $35 million less than in fiscal 21. And just for instance, well, I've given you the 4 instances of what the impact on both larger and smaller towns would be throughout the 80 towns benefiting from that fiscal capacity disparity aid. Madam Chair, I think we can afford this, and I think we are extending aid not only on a universal cost per student, but also on a basis that recognizes the fiscal capacity and taxpayer equity that's needed across the state. So I'll be glad to answer questions of the committee. I think this is wise legislation, and I'd be glad to see this be adopted by our committee so that it could go to the fiscal committee for further review.
Thank you, Senator Khan. Any questions from any of the members of the committee? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Khan. I'm just looking at the fiscal note of this bill and trying to reconcile SB 135 to this bill. And if this bill is SB 135 plus the fiscal capacity disparity aid of 36.7 million added in, that total benefit to towns would be $82.3 million versus the total of $67.1 million that we have in our fiscal note here. Can you tell me what the difference is? Is the whole difference in that the CPI index that you've added?
Or waived for the year. It is the difference in the inflationary increases not being applied. And so what you see in the fiscal note, and I agree, I didn't write the fiscal note. I was critical of the fiscal note because it did not adequately net the difference between fiscal capacity disparity aid and a waiver of the inflationary increases. So if you look at the fiscal note, and you're at the bottom of page 1 of that. Are we in the same place, Senator? And you see that under the current law for fiscal 22, it shows a higher number than the proposed, and that's about $78 difference. That's the inflationary increase on base adequacy. The inflationary increase on free and reduced meals is a $39 difference. You add those together and multiply them across the average daily membership of attendance, and that adds up to 15 million in total. And that's what's netted against the $36 million additional distribution for disparity aid.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
Thank you. Do you have a breakout by town what the benefit would be for the two parts of the bill here?
I have it for the 36 million. I do not have it for the 15 million. The fiscal note, it's not provided in the fiscal note. The Department of Education, I believe, has produced that, but I don't have that. And I believe we have representatives of the Department of Education with us that could provide that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hennessy. Anybody else? I just have a small question here, Senator Khan. In the first paragraph, last sentence, this act will help.
Yes.
This act will help school districts plan for town meetings. I'm assuming you mean plan the budget plan for the town meetings, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions from members of the committee, let's go to the public.
Representative Mary Heath. Can you hear me? Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair and members of the Senate Education Committee, for the record, my name is Mary Heath, and I have served Hillsborough County District since 2013. And the purpose of my testimony this morning is to support Senate Bill 145 that provides a safe harbor for school districts across the state that have seen either drastic decreases or increases in enrollment due to the COVID pandemic. I think you are all more aware what this pandemic has done to our schools, families, and children. School districts were plummeted into new modes of instruction almost overnight and forced to make huge technology purchases that would help each child have access to the new learning formats. Those struggles continue, and many students simply have dropped from the enrollment numbers, or families have moved into New Hampshire into their vacation homes, increasing the enrollment. In the city of Manchester, we're going to see an overall decrease in the numbers that were generated from the New Hampshire Department of Ed of about $12 million. Claremont will see 2.9 million. Lancaster, $624,540. Concord, 1.2 million. And the list goes on to the total amount of over $89 million. COVID has ravaged our municipalities, and HB 145 maintains a district count that more truly reflects the school numbers in each district. I realize that the committee recently passed SB 135, but 145 does more to fully make school districts whole. And this morning in House Finance, we're hearing House Bill 623, which also is an additional, even more aggressive approach. As a general court, we need to move forward with these bills in an expedited fashion and complete their good intent. Our towns and cities are meeting as we speak. And there's also, we've seen an increase in state retirement costs. So property taxes are going to feel a significant impact. I urge you this morning to pass 145 so those bills can move forward to mediate the stress our school districts are under and give them information they need to work through their school budgets. And I thank you for listening to me this morning. I'm also in another meeting right now over in the House, so I would ask your indulgence, and I would prefer not to take any questions if that's possible. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative Heath. And who is the next?
Next, we have Mark from the Department of Education, and I apologize for not attempting that last name.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Mark Manganello. I'm with the Department of Education, and I'm available if the committee has any questions.
It may be a little early for that. Are you going to be able to hang around for a bit?
I'll be on the call. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next, we have Jeff McLynch.
Mr. McLynch,
Good morning.
welcome.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Chairwoman Ward, Senator Khan, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony this morning on Senate Bill 145. For the record, my name is Jeff McLynch, and I'm the project director of the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. As has already been discussed this morning, due to both the COVID-19 pandemic and the changes in law, state education aid in total is expected to fall by tens of millions of dollars between fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. Such a drop would force many cities and towns to turn to significant property tax increases or severe spending cuts as they set their school budgets for the next academic year. In fact, the scale of such property tax increases could drive up the bills some homeowners face by hundreds of dollars. Senate Bill 145 would address several sources of that anticipated decline, and by extension, reduce the likelihood and potential scale of such rate increases or spending cuts. The bill could be strengthened still further by the removal of one provision and the insertion of another. I urge the committee to make those changes and to recommend Senate Bill 145 as ought to pass. To expand upon those points, and as has been touched on earlier, estimates from the Department of Education suggest that overall public school attendance has declined by about 4% over the past year. Similar estimates point to a roughly 24% decrease in the count of free and reduced price lunch students. Those numbers will almost surely rebound as the pandemic wanes and as schools resume full-time in-person classes during the next academic year. But because of a time lag in the education aid formula, those temporarily lower numbers will be used to decide the amount of state aid districts will receive in the coming year, even as attendance climbs back to normal levels. The bill before you this morning recognizes that the counts we are seeing now are not likely to reflect the situation schools will face this fall, and thus sets a reasonable floor underneath them by using the higher of the two ADMA figures. Now, protecting school budgets from further damage due to the pandemic would certainly be a positive outcome and warrants approval of Senate Bill 145, but would nevertheless forestall only about half of the estimated decline I mentioned earlier. To close that gap entirely, the legislature should preserve the progress it made under the current budget in bolstering state education aid and targeting it to those cities and towns most in need. That budget added two elements to New Hampshire's funding formula for the current year: additional aid intended to assist cities and towns with higher concentrations of low-income students, and fiscal capacity disparity aid designed to help municipalities with comparatively low property values. The purpose of those two forms of aid is to help mitigate long-standing inequities in New Hampshire's school funding system, inequities that will be just as severe in the coming biennium as they are in the current one. Consequently, both forms of aid should be extended and maintained until more comprehensive remedies are adopted. Senate Bill 145 would extend fiscal capacity disparity aid. I would ask the committee to amend the bill to do the same for additional aid as well. One other enhancement that the committee may wish to consider, particularly since the state's fiscal outlook is less dim than previously anticipated, is to remove the provision of the bill that suspends the regular inflation adjustment made to the state's adequacy formula for fiscal 22. While that provision is temporary, it would nevertheless deny local schools about $15 million in adequacy aid in the coming year. Those funds will desperately be needed to help overcome the myriad challenges that remain even after the pandemic has passed. In sum, given the longstanding problems that plague New Hampshire's school funding system, as well as the new obstacles that students, families, and schools will have to overcome in the year ahead, I hope that the committee will strengthen Senate Bill 145, that it will recommend the bill as ought to pass, and that the Senate as a whole will act on the bill as quickly as possible. Again, I want to thank the members of the committee for the chance to testify this morning, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. McLynch? Thank you very much.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Khan.
I just was, does Mr. McLynch, do you have a total dollar amount for what you just recommended for education grants for fiscal 22?
Can the members of the committee hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I thought I'd been muted. I believe that, as you mentioned earlier, the inflation adjustment change is about $15 million. The additional assistance figure for fiscal 21, I believe, was about $11 to $12 million. That estimate, though, would change depending on how it would be calculated, since that is keyed to free and reduced price lunch counts. You would need to make sure that it's not affected by the same issue that I testified to earlier. It's not clear sort of how much those two would interact, but I believe that comparable legislation that is being considered in the House, House Bill 623, I believe the fiscal note on that bill is roughly $90 million. So I believe that's a sort of rough order of magnitude.
Which would put it around $1.010 billion.
In total aid?
Yes, and I
believe
think
that sounds about right. I think, again, I think the net change is about 90 million, which is about the size of the anticipated decline.
Thank you.
Any others? Thank you, Ms. McLynch.
Thank you.
And who do we have next?
Megan Tuttle.
Ms. Tuttle, welcome.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I have remote learning going on in the background. In the interest of time, I do have a longer testimony prepared that I will email to Ava Hawks, if that's okay. And in the interest of time, I'll just give a shortened version right now.
Great, thank you.
For the record, my name is Megan Tuttle. I'm the president of NEA New Hampshire, representing about 17,000 educators across the state. And with Senate Bill 145, we're urging you to find it ought to pass. With all the needs and the uncertainty around school budgets right now, this added stability through the next budget year is only going to help to support our students and our educators, as well as our local property taxpayers. So to keep it brief, we're in total support of this bill and asking you ought to pass, and I will get the longer testimony over to you within the next probably 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any
Thank you.
questions for Ms. Tuttle from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the next person on my list was David Bates, but I don't see him on the list anymore. So if he is here, could he please raise his hand? And in the meantime, I will bring in Jim O'Connell.
Good morning.
Mr. O'Connell, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Jim O'Connell. I'm a school board member from the city of Manchester. I'm a school board member at large representing all 12 wards. I'm the chairman of our committee on education legislation. I'm here this morning speaking on my own behalf. So I would just like to reiterate that which I've heard from Senator Khan earlier, when he mentions about the impact on our towns and cities. We have a budget meeting tomorrow evening, and in Manchester, we're looking at a shortfall, as Representative Heath mentioned, of $12 million, so the $11,900,000 and something. But with the cuts, we're taking about $2 million from contingency money, which we don't have a lot of, etc. And we're ending up with cuts of just under $8 million in the city of Manchester. And I would just to put some numbers on this for a minute, I just point out that the state recently compiled the most recent average student or per student expenditures. And Manchester, despite all its challenges, which I don't have to go through here, we're spending $12,430 per student. The state average is $16,000, close to $800. That's a $4,380 per student difference. It amounts to $57 million, just to put it in perspective. If the city of Manchester were to spend what the other towns in the state of New Hampshire spend per student, we would need $57 million more. It's not possible, within the realms of possibility, to ask the Manchester property taxpayers to find $57 million just to reach the state average. And I think we would all be agreed that Manchester has the nature of the population that it deals with and the level of need within that population, that the need in Manchester is greater than the state average. So clearly, this consequence of the COVID, this 5% drop off or so in population, or 5.5%. I don't have the exact number in front of me right now, but something in that order in the city of Manchester. The net of it all for tomorrow night for us is that we're going to find money everywhere we can. We're going to lay off by retirement, not by riffing, but about 28 teachers, and we're still we'll be $7 million, searching for $7 million. So I would urge you and plead with you to fund this, or to pass this bill that it ought to pass. And I think particularly, I know money is hard to find at any time, but given that this would not be something less than level funding from last year from the state's expenditure point of view. So thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Any questions from the members? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you.
Next, we have Lori Tiernan.
Ms. Tiernan, welcome.
It's actually, this has not happened to me before. This is Declan McEachran, City Councilor for the City of Portsmouth, but I did sign in on my wife's Skype or Zoom. So this is Declan McEachran.
Okay, this is Mr. Tiernan.
Yes, Mr. Tiernan. So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Declan McEachran, City Councilor for the City of Portsmouth. I come to speak for myself and the City of Portsmouth. And I come before you to speak against Senate Bill 158. I don't wish to return to the donor town language of the past. I was 7 when 5 New Hampshire communities sued the state arguing.
I'm sorry, this is Senate Bill 145.
Oh, so sorry. Is this rescheduled from 150? Was 158 rescheduled?
No, it's coming afterwards.
I will change my name and hold my comments until then.
Okay, thank you.
So if David Bates is with us and you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. And if there's anyone else wishing to speak to Senate Bill 145 who hasn't spoken yet, please raise your hand now. Senator Ward, I don't see any hands.
Okay, thank you. Well, that closes the hearing on Senate Bill 145. Next, we have Senate Bill 158. I believe Senator Khan is the sponsor.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I I'm just going to make sure I've got the right set of materials in front of me. Madam Chair, it is my pleasure to introduce Senate Bill 158, an act to provide a formula for funding an adequate education that is based on student performance and outcomes, as opposed to an input-driven model. I distributed last evening a report, a portion of my testimony to each of you, because I thought it was important to document that SB 158 is an outcome, it's the legislative outcome of the Commission to Study School Funding. That commission was convened a year ago in January of 2020. And the 12 months of committee work can be found in with its full report, references previous studies that informed school funding in the state of New Hampshire, as well as court findings. The presentations that were made at meetings and public engagement can all be found on the website of the Carsey School for Public Policy, which is carsey.unh.edu/school-funding. And I wanted to make sure that we wrote into the record the work of the 17 members of that commission and provided the recognition and gratitude of the state Senate for their work. These 17 members, together with the supporting professionals who supported the commission's work, in spite of a pandemic, attended 85 different meetings during 2020 to arrive at the conclusions and recommendations that are a part of the study. The primary role of the Commission to Study School Funding was to review the current education funding formula and make recommendations to ensure uniform and equitable design for financing the cost of an adequate education for all public students. If SB 145 was a quicker adjustment for a one-year period, SB 158 is that longer view that allows us to look to fiscal 23 and beyond as to how we can better allocate the dollars that we spend in the state. New Hampshire currently spends $3.3 billion a year on funding public school districts. In fiscal 21, state spending with disparity aid of $60 million makes up 31% of that total funding, just 31%. And that's destined that if we don't do something like pass Senate Bill 145, that's destined to go down by 2 or 3 more percent in fiscal 22 and 23. These figures, 31% or 29% of total spending on public schools, is the lowest proportion of spending towards public schools in the country. The current formula that we use is an accounting model that comes out of the 2008 Education Funding Commission that followed a history in that period of time of No Child Left Behind. It arrived with the ED 25 report. It's something completed by each school district and submitted to the the Department of Education annually. And that report does a good job of accounting for things. And it yields that formula from 2008, it yields a universal state funding per student of $3,709 per student. That unbelievable amount is our fiscal measure of an adequate education. The universal state funding per student is based on 3 measures, three the bulk of the funding in that formula that leads to $3,709 per student is based on measures that don't exist in any school district in New Hampshire, not in any school district. And let me give you the example of the three biggest drivers to that. First is it expects that there is a average student per teacher ratio in 4th through 12th grades of 30 students to 1 teacher. That ratio does not exist anywhere in New Hampshire. The average student to teacher ratio in New Hampshire is 12 to 1, 12 students to 1 teacher. The highest that you'll find for the last fiscal year was 22 to 1. And that's the largest driver of the costs in the universal cost. A second largest driver is teacher salaries. And that's based on 3rd year average teacher salaries. Let me say it again. The average salary of 3rd year teachers in a district. But we all know that that is not the basis of the average salaries for teachers in a district. And then the third largest factor is that full-time staff that receive benefits are calculated, those benefits are calculated at 1/3 of the salary dollars. And testimony offered to the commission from school business officers suggested that that average across the state is much closer to 58% per salary dollar. So the universal funding per student of $3,709, that makes up 60% of that $1,024 million total education grant for fiscal 21. And stabilization funding, which is based on enrollments and trying to hold harmless enrollment changes since 2012, that makes up another 20%. And then you take away the disparity aid that obviously we are still debating whether that's going to continue forward or not. And those two factors, the universal funding per student and stabilization, they account for 85% of the total state education grant to school districts. A very small slice of state funding is based on differentiated student needs and community characteristics. Senate Bill 158 proposes an education cost model that uses varying costs per school district, and they're based on student need and community characteristics. The model begins with the actual spending by school districts per student, which in fiscal year 20 averaged around $17,000 a student. Over the entire state, spending per 17,000 students, which totals $3.3 billion, achieves a statewide average student outcome that is competitive with the best states' outcomes in the nation, in the top 10 to 15%. And those average student outcomes are based on 3 things. It's test scores, graduation rates, and attendance rates. They are all part of student performance standards established in RSA 193E3, the opportunity for an adequate education. If a school district spends less than the statewide average, the study found there's almost a 1-to-1 correlation that if they spend less than the state average, student outcomes in that district will be below the state outcomes on average across the state. It's true that student characteristics like poverty, as measured by free and reduced meals, priced meals, that special education needs and English language learner students require a school district to spend more than the statewide average to achieve average student outcomes. And such is the case for places like Manchester or Newport or Pittsfield, or many schools, both large and small in the state. So those are weighted factors, and you can see those weighting factors as you begin to look at section 3 and 4 of the bill. It also includes not just factors, weighting factors based on student need, but also on community characteristics. There's a factor for a small school size because small schools have less economy of scale, and we've demonstrated that statistically. And that higher grade levels, where there are more elective courses and advanced courses offered and student activities offered around the school's activities, when there's more of that available in middle school and high school, the cost of the opportunity for a school district to achieve and the average student outcome needs to be higher. And so there are weights for those factors as well. And based on these statistically established relationships, one can predict the cost of the opportunity for every school district to meet for all students the opportunity for an adequate education. And that's the constitutional standard the New Hampshire courts have been asking the legislature to solve, that every school district provide the opportunity for an adequate education for all students at a cost to taxpayers that is reasonable and proportionate and not dependent on a zip code. Using 10 years of our own state data, we have statistical relationships upon which this legislature can address comparable student outcomes and taxpayer equity. This isn't a light switch to just turn on and off. What we need is a transition plan that we can develop together. And we don't need to raise state taxes to put the education cost model recommended by the commission and this legislation in Senate Bill 158. We don't need a tax increase, a state tax increase, to put it into effect. This is more a matter of will. And it's important. New Hampshire families, communities, and employers are weighing in the balance. My colleagues, I believe we are all partners in embracing the opportunity for an adequate education for all of New Hampshire's kids, and we can do this better together. I have suggested to Chairwoman that we allow the next speakers to go to recognize the commission members who wish to speak next, so that the remainder of the bill can be presented in an efficient manner. But Chairwoman Ward, I'd be glad to take questions at this time if committee members have that.
Any questions for Senator Khan from the committee members? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Khan. So we do not have a fiscal note on this yet. Do you have any idea when that would be available?
Again, I think we're going to need to direct that to the Department of Education. I know we had conversations at the end of last week. I have not seen a fiscal note, and I think that they were in the process of preparing that.
Thank you.
Senator DeShardy, did you have a
Yes,
question?
thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Khan. It was similar to Senator Hennessy. I was just wondering about the comparison and impact to each and every town.
Yes, I understand that. The full commission report provides that, and if you go to the Carsey School site, there is a simulator model, and Senator Ricciardi, I'd be glad to spend some time on the phone with you to just make sure you can guide your way into the AIR simulator and look at each town, the impact of the education cost model on each of them.
Thank you, Senator Khan. Any other questions? Did you have another question, Senator DeShardy?
No.
Okay. Good. Then no more questions from the committee. Let's call on Representative David Luno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the audio okay?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dave Luno, and I represent the people of Merrimack District 10, which are the towns of Hopkinton and the western part of the city of Concord. As Senator Khan introduced this bill, this is the comprehensive school refunding form package based on the findings of the School Funding Commission. A unifying theme throughout the School Funding Commission's work, based on the data we reviewed and the substantial testimony and comment received, is that education funding policy should be guided by the fundamental concept that any solutions must focus on all our kids. Funding policies must be student-centered and designed to create equal opportunity in order to narrow the achievement gaps associated with poverty and other forms of social disadvantage. Closing those gaps for all students, regardless of their needs or where they live, became the shared vision among Commission members. With respect to fiscal policy, the Commission found that New Hampshire's current system of funding fails to direct aid to more needy communities in a meaningful manner, and inequities manifest themselves in more needy districts through lower student outcomes and higher property tax burdens. Key findings from the School Funding Commission center on student outcomes, what Senator Khan was talking about, a combination of student performance on statewide assessment tests, graduation rates, and attendance rates. Overall, New Hampshire students perform very well, and in fact rank among the best in the country. But we also found that in districts with higher incidences of poverty, student outcomes are well below state average, and these school districts spend less on education than do districts serving more affluent communities. The Commission looked at 10 years of data from New Hampshire schools, specifically student and community characteristics, student outcomes, and how money is spent, and developed a formula to estimate the cost for every district to educate students to a comparable statewide outcome. And we developed a formula to fund that estimated or predicted cost, starting with local taxes. But not every city and town is the same, and some need more help than others. That's where the state comes in with a grant to get them the rest of the way to that predicted cost mark, making sure every district has access to the resources they need. It doesn't break the bank or require new taxes. But that's not what we do now. The state basically gives every district the same amount of money per student, let's say on average $4,600 per student. Here you go, good luck, and leaves the rest of it up to the local districts to raise with property taxes. Some can do it and others can't. Some districts spend on the order of $25,000 per student per year, and others like Manchester can only raise about half of that, 13,000 kids there. And it's no surprise that student outcomes are tied to this fiscal disparity. Not fair to students and not fair to taxpayers. Honestly, it's not fair to any of us. Senator Khan talked about the formula for calculating the cost of inadequate education. One of the things this bill does is to separate the calculation of the cost from the calculation of the funding. They're two separate things. Costs are based on what it takes the district to educate students to a statewide performance outcome, and grants are based on the financial resources a district needs to do that. Section 5 of the bill lays out the framework for how to calculate the state grants for each city and town. So we're looking at the middle of page 3 of the bill. And it probably requires more work on the language and certainly the numbers, but I want to focus on how this works. The goal is to make sure that every district can fund the estimated cost for an adequate education that Senator Khan talked about. It starts with a minimum local tax effort, a tax burden that is reasonable and proportional. In the bill here, it's $7.50 per thousand. That would be the minimum local tax rate effort. But it could be less, say $5 per thousand. For some towns, that's all they need. It raises enough with that minimum local tax to fund the estimated cost for an adequate education. But for most towns, it falls short, and that's where the state comes in to get them the rest of the way. Grants are based on financial need. It's a lot like the funding model used in Massachusetts now. The taxpayers in Lawrence work just as hard as the taxpayers in Westwood to fund their schools. It's just that Lawrence needs more help from the state to get them to that estimated cost for an adequate education. It's working well there for students and taxpayers. So I'm going to talk about another part of the bill, but before I do that, I want to acknowledge that while the concepts here come out of the School Funding Commission's work, there is more work to do on this bill, not only with the numbers, but possibly with policy language too. You can dial in a lot of different settings that work and don't blow up the budget, but they also have an impact on student success and taxpayer fairness. So I'm hopeful this committee will continue to work on this bill. The rest of the bill is directed to the collection of state property tax and updates to the low and moderate income property tax relief program, both important recommendations from the commission, and also part of House Bill 504, which will be heard in House Ways and Means tomorrow. These policies can stand on their own as separate bills, but they also work well together too. Section 7 and 8 at the top of page 4 repeals the fixed amount of state property tax collected and replaces that with a fixed rate. The tax is collected locally, and after deducting reasonable collection costs, the collected tax is remitted in whole to the state. Section 10 at the top of page 5 directs it to be deposited to the Education Trust Fund. Section 9 notifies taxpayers about the state's property tax relief program, which brings us to sections 11 and 12 that describe the property tax relief program in detail, with up-to-date income eligibility thresholds and meaningful property tax relief for up to $1,000 per owner-occupied homestead. The sections also establish committees to study property tax relief for renters and tax deferral options for homeowners as well. With that, Senator Khan and I have walked the committee through the bill, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Luno. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. Thank you, Representative Luno.
Thank you.
The next person we have is Representative Myler.
I don't see Representative Myler on my list here. If you're here, please raise your hand. And if you're participating via phone, dial *9.
How about Drew Atchison?
Oh, I think Representative Myler is on the phone. Someone raised their hand.
Okay.
I think you dial *6 to unmute.
I'm here. Are you there? Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
are. Thank you, Representative Myler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for taking my testimony. As a member, for the record, I'm Mel Myler, and I represent Merrimack County 10, which is the towns of Hopkinton and Ward 5 in Concord. As a member of the commission, one of my charges was to try to develop a robust outreach program to try to get input from a variety of different sources during our study. During that time, we sought input from school employees, taxpayers, local and state officials, employers, elder residents, students. We really tried to reach out to get input from folks. We did a survey of over 1,800 educators from 177 districts. The University Survey Center, which surveyed over 1,000 people. They asked 8 questions devoted to the commission's work. We also conducted 10 dedicated public comment sessions trying to seek, again, more input. The findings of this effort was really basically 6. One, there was a conclusion that there is inequities in public education and that we currently are not providing equal opportunities for all students. 2, we did discover that there was a feeling that there was an unequal application of taxes across the state and that property tax relief was in fact necessary. Interesting, the conundrum was that there was no consensus on an alternative forms for revenue for schools. Third, The public does not understand how schools are funded and the process of granting state funds to local school districts. 4, the funding, there's a general consensus that the funding should be student-centered based upon student need. 5, local educators felt that there was a lack of capacity for them to implement DoD mandates and legislative mandates due to the lack of funds coming from the state. And 6, the question of what would provide quality education, and overwhelmingly, the answer was it's the quality of the teaching staff that provides the quality of the education. And this is particularly important because in those districts that have less capacity to develop funds for schools, there is a high turnover of staff in those schools, which means that there's no continuity of program or teaching or building of relationships with students. Those are our findings, Madam Chair, and I stand for any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you, Representative Myler. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Drew Atchison here?
Yes.
Welcome, Mr. Atchison.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Drew Atchison, and I'm from the American Institutes for Research. I directed the study of school funding in New Hampshire that was conducted by AIR as part of the commission's work. In that study, we used an education cost model as a tool to evaluate educational adequacy in New Hampshire. This approach has also been used in other states in response to state court cases, such as Kansas, and resulting from legislative requests, such as Vermont, to examine adequacy and equal opportunity. An education system that is adequate is one that provides an equal opportunity for all students to reach a common, worthy set of outcomes or educational goals. Given that students have different educational needs, achieving adequacy requires providing differing levels of support to address differential needs, and this in turn requires differential levels of funding. The education cost model that we used in the study is the most rigorous approach to examining adequacy and results in information that can directly inform state funding formulas. Why is this the case? First, the education cost model is an outcome-based method that is grounded in data on actual levels of spending, student outcomes, and other factors that influence the cost of education, including student needs. Using this data, the education cost model provides estimates of cost based on observed relationships between spending, student outcomes, and other cost factors. Other input-based methods are largely based on guesswork on what resources are needed to achieve largely hypothetical student outcomes. Second, our study was based on New Hampshire's own data collected and reported by the New Hampshire Department of Education. This means that the results apply specifically to New Hampshire's state context, the districts, schools, and students that make up New Hampshire's public school system. And the data that we used are easily accessible for use in the generation and administration of a state funding formula. The funding formula that came out of our study, which is the basis for the proposed legislation, is based on actual costs and needs facing school districts and promotes student equity by appropriately differentiating based on student need. The formula is transparent, simple to describe, and simple to administer using data already collected by the New Hampshire Department of Education, and it provides predictable and stable funding for districts. The formula can easily be updated and maintained over time. Thank you for allowing me to speak in support of this bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Atchison. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've known Mr. Atchison over the past year. Drew, what other states has AIR worked with to evolve outcome-driven school funding formulas?
Yeah, the most recent was Vermont. and they're currently in the process and a similar process as you all, trying to adopt the weights that we proposed through our study in Vermont. This is relatively new approach. Kansas, as I mentioned, we weren't the firm involved in the cost modeling in Kansas, but they have done it several times in response to state court cases. But like I said, this is a cutting edge approach, and it has a variety of merits, including that it's based on real data and real relationships, and it's specific to the state context in which we do the studies.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Atchison.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next, we have Val Zanchuk. You are muted.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you
Welcome,
very-
Mr. Sanchuk.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Members of the committee. For the record, my name is Val Zanchuk. I'm president of Graphicast, it's a manufacturing company located in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. I'm also the former chairman of the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire, and I am a commissioner on the Commission to Study School Funding. Besides being a business owner and a spokesperson for the business community, I have been involved in education and workforce development work for years. Business and our education system go hand in hand. The success of our business community in New Hampshire is closely tied to the success of our public education system, especially as the demographic shift in New Hampshire's population forecasts lower enrollments in our school as time progresses. The constant demand for a high-quality workforce puts more pressure on the public schools to educate a shrinking number of graduates prepared for the demands of 21st century jobs. This demand exists everywhere in the state, not just in certain areas. The manufacturers in the North Country need top quality graduates entering their employ as much as companies in Nashua and in the South. Yet the way we currently fund schools does not produce that kind of quality educational uniformity. It skews that quality based on the property wealth of the community. From the perspective of a statewide policy, to me, this makes no sense. We can ill afford to have different outcomes based on wealth. Public education had been the great equalizer of American society for over 100 years. It drove broad growth in the economy. Now, businesses are scrambling to find a workforce prepared for their needs. In fact, several of my most recent hires are in their 60s, and all of us in industry and business struggle to find younger workers. As a member of the Commission to Study School Funding, I had the opportunity to review the data that quantify the cost of a quality education and the mechanism of funding that quality in a manner consistent with current costs and constitutional obligations. Employing the statewide property tax as it was originally envisioned is a constitutionally consistent and with proper tax relief boundaries an equitable method to fund the state's obligation to provide the opportunity for an adequate education. Focusing on the outcomes of the education process makes infinite sense and provides a better mechanism to measure the effectiveness of public schools. It's no different than measuring the success of a business by its sales or new products developed, not on how much it spends without regard to outcomes. The data powerfully presented the inadequacies of our current input and funding method. The state would be remiss in its obligations to continue this process, knowing the continuing tax burden placed on those least able to pay those taxes and the overt neglect of the potential of our students in these property poor areas. It is just bad business to continue doing something you know doesn't work. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchuk. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Ardinger.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Can you hear me?
We can.
Hello to all of the members of the committee and to the committee's wonderful staff. It's great to see you both again. My name, for the record, is Bill Ardinger. I'm an attorney with a local law firm, Rath, Young and Pignatelli. Our firm represents many clients, including some that we lobby for. I am here today not on behalf of my firm or my clients, I am here on my own behalf, and any comments that I have are only my own and not the comments or position of any client or my law firm. I am a graduate of Claremont Stevens High School back in 1978. I met my wife there, and a proud graduate. The school system there has suffered over the years as their economy has changed. This is a story that's similar to many other communities. Under the current education funding system, most of the state aid goes out on a uniform per pupil basis, so that school district in Hampton gets, or Hanover gets, the same amount of money per pupil largely as the school district in Berlin or in Claremont. This is not the right answer. I was a proud member appointed, designated by the governor to serve on the Education Funding Commission that was led by Senator Khan, Representative Luno, and Representative Myler as our executive leadership. And I think that the recommendations of the commission are very important to the future of New Hampshire's public education system. Public education, as you know, is incredibly complex. It involves many of our most important interests. It is the largest public sector expenditure in the state of New Hampshire. Almost a quarter of our state and local public funds are used on public education. As Senator Khan said, we are one of the leading states in the country in terms of spending per pupil on average. The problem is that we need to focus on getting those resources to the districts and to the students who need the greatest help to achieve good outcomes and serve the workforce goals that Val just testified to. I would say that the bill is, as Representative Luno said, a starting point. This is complex. If you think about how many uncertainties are facing the state budget process and the state policy process this session, with COVID, with remote access, in many respects, diving into Senate Bill 158 is something that can reasonably be expected to take the session and more. Perhaps a best target to do this right is to have your committee take the lead, have this bill before it, recognize the incredible uncertainties that face. We may have the most unique supply. I served on the Gopher Committee with the CARES Act money. We may have substantially more federal dollars coming to the state that this committee could look to as a way to help finance the transition to this much fairer system that is embodied in the spirit of Senate Bill 158. I am very committed to work with the committee. I urge the committee to carefully study this bill, to develop the answer. Remember, another uncertainty that's pending before us is there's a court case still sitting at the New Hampshire Supreme Court that could come out at any time and require this legislature, notwithstanding the uncertainty, to move ahead. I think this Senate Education Committee is the right place to hold this vehicle, to take in testimony, to continue the work of the Education Funding Commission. And I, as one member of the public, am so committed to working with the leaders of our commission and this committee and other legislators to get to a better answer for the state of New Hampshire. Thank you very much for the chance to testify on this day with freezing rain outside. A good use of remote access, Senator Ward.
That's true. Thank you very much, Mr. Ardinger. Any questions from anyone on the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
The next one is Bruce Mallory.
Good morning, Chairperson Ward and members of the Senate Education Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this morning. My name is Bruce Mallory. I'm a professor emeritus of education at the University of New Hampshire. I serve as the team leader for the Carsey School of Public Policy, joined by Carrie Portree and Jordan Hensley in our role as support to the commission. That role has included managing the logistical, communications, public engagement, and research tasks of the commission. We staffed all public meetings, designed and conducted extensive public outreach and engagement activities, coordinated the research work of AIR, and assisted with the preparation and dissemination of the commission's final report. The Carsey School has been our role has essentially been to serve as a resource for evidence-based, nonpartisan information related to school funding and education policy. One product of our work, as Senator Khan mentioned previously, has been the creation of a dedicated website for the Commission to Study School Funding, housed on the Carsey School webpage. The Commission website contains an extensive repository of research reports and policy papers on school funding produced by AIR as well as from other states and prior efforts in New Hampshire. Our judicial decisions, all judicial decisions and orders relative to school funding in New Hampshire can be found there, as can past legislative committee reports completed over the past 2 decades. The website also archives video recordings of all commission meetings and all public comments received during commission meetings, as well as those received at any time via our public comment portal. Under the terms of our contract with the commission, the website will be maintained over the next 5 years to provide easy access for legislators and members of the public who wish to review the commission's work. We will continue to add public comment as it is received and to archive the minutes of all commission meetings. We'll add relevant research and policy reports as they become available as well. In conclusion, it's been an honor personally as one who's been involved in public education in New Hampshire for the past 40 years, both as a staff member to the House Education Committee in the mid-1970s, and then over an extended several decades on the faculty at UNH. This opportunity to finally address and resolve what to me is the most complex and intractable policy challenge that the state faces is a particular moment in time in the context of the challenges of COVID and a state budget, and in a sense makes it even more urgent that the New Hampshire General Court begin to move forward on a phased-in process with the recommendations of the commission. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mallory. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. Thank you. Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before Mr. Ardinger goes, there was a question I wanted to ask him, if I might.
Mr. Ardinger, are you still around?
He is. Let me bring him back in.
Go ahead, Senator Khan.
I am, Senator. Thank you.
The man behind the graph. Mr. Ardinger, you've been one of the things that impressed me, Bill, about your role on the commission is that you've been around this funding issue for a long time and around the court cases as well. And I'm wondering what is it about the work here that you think navigates the court cases and it navigates into a space that allows us to settle something that for 25 years the state of New Hampshire hasn't been able to solve?
Thank you, Senator Khan. Can you hear me all? Very good.
Yes.
I indeed, sadly, I am older. I've been around a long time. I was there back in 1997 at the end of the year when the court issued its Claremont 2 decision. I was in the state back from Washington in 93 when it issued its Claremont 1 decision. I remember seeing Senator Hennessy, whom I've not met, but I know her love for the North Country is deep. I've heard that. I worked with Senator Fred King back in the very first years following Claremont 2, his entire purpose was to get a solution to this problem that would direct greater state resources to the communities like Berlin, like Claremont, the plaintiffs of the Claremont case that were most in need. Unfortunately, we have struggled in the state for that entire period. In contrast, as Representative Luno mentioned, Senator Khan, there is right to the south of us a state, Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, that has gone through a similar change. Their Claremont 1 decision came out in 1993. It said that they were unfairly treating some lower resourced towns, lesser resourced towns. What did Massachusetts do? They came up with a program called their Chapter 70 program, which in framework is similar to the commission's recommendations and to the framework that's embodied in Senate Bill 158. That program ended up providing to communities like Wellesley $1,700 per pupil from state budget sources, whereas it provides over $10,000 per pupil to places that have the greatest need, like Lowell, like New Bedford. And I think that this program embodied in this bill as part of the commission's recommendation, number one, it would make Senator Fred King very proud to see this recommendation coming forward now. It's something that has been the answer, but we have not been able to achieve it yet. I think that the court, in looking at this framework, would say Massachusetts found an answer that caused their court to say, you've moved, legislature, to do the right thing, and we're going to back off. I think this framework can do the same thing in New Hampshire and provide the kind of balance to our education funding system that says to students in Manchester, we're going to provide that district with the resources it needs to give those students the same opportunity that students in Hanover have. And I think it does it, as others have testified, without new taxes. And it does it with just a statistically sound, as Drew Atkinson said, statistically sound and very cutting edge, peer-reviewed methodology that identifies need and based on an output basis, an outcomes basis that would make New Hampshire proud and the legislature proud, and wonderful leaders like Senator Fred King, who I had a great opportunity to work with, make him proud. So I thank you, Senator Khan, for your question. I believe this is in the right direction to putting a settlement to this issue, which has plagued our state for too long.
Thank you, Mr. Ardinger.
Thank you, Mr. Ardinger. Any other questions? Seeing none, let's go to the next person. Sonia, you have the list?
I do. Next, we have Jeff McLynch.
Morning again, Mr. McLynch.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you once again for the chance to testify. Again, for the record, my name is Jeff McLynch, and I'm still the project director of the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. As you've heard at length this morning, this bill, Senate Bill 158, seeks to advance a number of the recommendations put forward by the Commission to Study School Funding. The New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project applauds the efforts of the bill sponsors to continue the critical conversations initiated by the Commission, conversations that we hope will lead to lasting, comprehensive, and equitable reform of the Granite State school funding system. And we support many of the principal elements of the bill, as they would make considerable progress toward achieving that longer-term goal. But we do have some reservations about some of the aspects of the bill and their possible implications for tax equity across various communities in New Hampshire. As has been discussed, to assist it in fulfilling its responsibilities, the Commission engaged AIR, a widely recognized research and evaluation organization, to conduct a rigorous, detailed, and empirical assessment of our state school funding system. And from our perspective, AIR made two, and from a very broad perspective, I might add, AIR made two exceptionally valuable contributions to the Commission's work. First, It provided a stark and compelling diagnosis of the problems plaguing our school funding system. And I just want to read one quote from from AIR's report. It found that the current system is inequitable from both student and taxpayer perspectives. The districts serving the highest proportion of students who are economically disadvantaged spend less on average compared with districts serving the fewest such students. Moreover, the districts with the least property wealth per student impose the highest local education tax rates to be able to fund their children's education. The second contribution, and you've heard about this at length already, so I don't want to belabor the point, is that it constructed a model that New Hampshire could employ to address those inequities. While further refinements to that model could be made, we believe it represents a path toward greater school funding fairness that this committee and the legislature as a whole ought to follow. One other point I want to make is that AIR explored two possible options for generating the revenue necessary to support its education cost model. While one option would generate that revenue through a single statewide property tax, the other would produce a comparable sum through a smaller statewide tax in combination with a mandatory minimum contribution derived from local property taxes. The bill before you today appears to employ this latter approach. The New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project does have some concerns about the implementation of mandatory local minimum contributions and their possible ramifications for property taxpayers in different parts of the state. That is, if cities and towns end up retaining some part of that local minimum, the effective rate of that contribution would vary from place to place, and by extension, perpetuate some of the inequities now found in our current approach. On a related note, in the absence of a fiscal note, as has been discussed, it's not yet clear whether the revenue that Senate Bill 158 would generate would be sufficient to support funding levels through the cost model that would enable every district to achieve statewide average outcomes. If the bill were to fall short of those levels, it could run the risk of leaving it to cities and towns to make up the difference, and again, continue with those same kind of disparities that we see today. While some questions about these mechanisms may still need to be addressed, the bill does include several other provisions related to property taxes that the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project strongly endorses, as they would help to make New Hampshire's tax system more fair. In particular, the bill would end the preferential treatment that some property wealthy municipalities now enjoy under the statewide property tax and require every community to pay the full amount of the tax to the state. As the New Hampshire Supreme Court ruled in Claremont 2, and I quote, "To the extent that the property tax is used to fund the provision of an adequate education, the tax must be administered in a manner that is equal in valuation and uniform in rate throughout the state. In its current form, the SWEP is far from uniform. Cities and towns with comparatively high property wealth are permitted to retain any revenue from the tax over and above what is needed to meet the cost of an adequate education. Consequently, the SWEP as it exists today exacerbates the wide disparities in property tax rates that persist throughout New Hampshire. In addition, Senate Bill 158 would significantly increase both the number of homeowners eligible to participate in our existing property tax relief program and the value of the rebates it would receive. More specifically, it would raise the income thresholds for single homeowners to $55,000 and for married couples to $70,000. Even more critically, it would extend the program to apply not simply to the statewide property tax as it does now, but to local school property taxes as well. Changes along these lines are absolutely imperative, for this program has all but evaporated in recent years. In 2003, the program provided roughly $7.5 million in property tax relief to 27,000 households. By 2018, those figures had dwindled to fewer than 7,000 households, receiving just a total of $1.1 million in rebates. Even as property taxes continue to decline, and despite the disproportionate responsibility the property tax places on families struggling to make ends meet. To conclude, the bill before you and the commission recommendations it aims to implement would travel a considerable distance on the road toward a fairer school funding system in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project looks forward to working with the members of the committee to strengthen the bill still further and to reaching that destination together. Thank you once again for the chance to testify, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. McLynch. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who do we have next, Sonia?
Jim O'Connell.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Jim O'Connell. I'm a school board member at Thank you. I'm a school board member at large from the city of Manchester. I did speak earlier on the earlier bill, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I would just like to say that I commend the work of the commission, and I think it offers an opportunity for the state to move forward in a significant way and resolve some of our inefficiencies in the way in which we distribute money. It's a little. I don't want to be in the position of pleading on behalf of Manchester or preaching about Manchester. It is in the end just one part of the state of New Hampshire, but we do have the needs here are stark, and even in microcosm within the city, we've worked hard to try and ameliorate the disparities in outcomes between one part of our city and another. But we see it writ large in the state, and I thought it might be helpful to sort of put something in perspective. I looked at from a report from 2019, so the numbers are a little dated. They were gathered in 2018, but it's an overview of Manchester's current status. But there were a couple of numbers I thought might help to illustrate the level of need. And I'm just going to refer to, there are 5 or 6 surrounding towns. I'm going to be very brief using those surrounding towns and then Manchester. But there were 2 things I thought I would refer to. One is English language learners, for instance. If we look at very quickly, the town of Auburn has 3, the town of Bedford 17, data for Candia not available, Deerfield 0, Goffstown 31, Hooksett 30, New Boston 0, and Londonderry 15. Those are the surrounding towns around Manchester. Manchester's number is, if you're ready, 1,477. The level of difference with great respect to those towns and their needs. And then I referred earlier to the amount of money spent in Manchester. I talked about between all grades, etc. But if we go to elementary school as an example, it just happens to be that there's down to about $10 an exact difference between the two. Manchester spends $12,200 per student. The average in the state of New Hampshire is $17,188 or $17,200. $5,000 difference. If you look at the $5,000 as a percentage of the 12,200 spent in Manchester, you can see that obviously the amount of what is lost. I'd like to see what is on the cutting room floor. The second set of statistics I just wanted to run for you, similarly with the surrounding towns, has to do with homelessness. And again, in Auburn, it says less than 10, Bedford 22, Candia less than 10, Deerfield 0, Goffstown 12, Hooksett, New Boston, and Londonderry less than 10 each. And in Manchester, again, these figures were gathered in 2016-17. In Manchester, 796 homeless or children living in shelter or living in insufficient housing. So I'm sure that the people in those other towns work very hard to deal with the children in need in their communities. But it is shocking to the conscience to think that in the largest city in the state, with 10% of the students in our state, we have these kinds of numbers, and the system that we have, we're trapped in this system where our taxpayers are doing the best they can to finance the public education. Despite the fact that we turn out children and send them to Harvard and Yale every year, and we have children do great things, we have proficiency rates, etc., that are shocking. Our average math proficiency is 24% as compared to a state average of 48%, and our reading proficiency scores are 35% versus 58% in the state, which is from this past year. And lastly, just when I spoke about our budget meeting tomorrow night, I mentioned a couple of things about the $7 million we have to find above where the cuts we're making already. But part of those cuts are we're closing one of our schools tomorrow night, Hallsville School, and we're also mothballing sections of our high schools in order to save costs. With all people of goodwill attempting to find an answer, I think the commission did a wonderful job in a bipartisan way of gathering information and trying to find an answer. I think this committee has a wonderful opportunity to move the state forward. And I would ask you to, what we're doing isn't good enough. We need to do better. And I would urge you to support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more, maybe.
We have a few more. We have Bonnie Maroney.
Ms. Maroney, welcome.
Good morning. I don't have as much detail as everybody else does. I'm a selectman in the town of Carroll. Basically, I just wish the committee would consider not going back to donor towns. I understand that we're supposed to be a high area where we have a high property value because we have Mount Washington Hotel and Bretton Woods and everything else. But the average person, such as myself, I'm retired, so I'm living on Social Security. Currently, we pay over $50,000 per student because we average about 50 students in our town. We go to a regional school. So there's basically no controls as far as what we end up paying to them because we need to get our children educated. So I just hope that the group considers this as well, that there is, we have high property value, but not everybody's in the wealth that these people are getting from the hotel and such. A lot of people live on minimum wage up in this part of the country. Also, I was looking at the format for the tax relief, and I find it a little bit cumbersome because I've had some seniors that have looked at this prior to it, and they don't all have accessibility to computers and the ability to get these forms. And a lot of people don't even know about them to get the tax relief back from this program as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Maroney. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Next, we have Declan McEachern.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm glad to have my right name on here. My name is Declan McEachern, City Councilor for the City of Portsmouth. I come before you today to speak against Senate Bill 158. I don't wish to return to the donor town language of the past. I was 7 when 5 New Hampshire communities sued the state, arguing that the education funding system was unconstitutional. 30 years later, I agree with the Supreme Court that for the purposes of providing an adequate education, New Hampshire is one community. And I believe that every child in New Hampshire should get the same opportunities as I will strive to give my 2 daughters. I believe so strongly because if it were not for my own education and that of my parents, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you today. I speak today as more than a dad who believes in education. I'm a counselor from the city of Portsmouth, my hometown. I live across the street from the house my dad grew up in, one that my grandfather built. I didn't need to take my dad's word for it that Portsmouth has changed. You have all likely seen it for yourself. You might look at the room and meals revenue and wonder if there's a home cook among us. But equally foolish is to look at our assessed values and believe that a majority of folks could afford to buy their homes at that price. I certainly couldn't, and I've only owned my home for 6 years. My time on the council has shown me that there are many struggling. A return to a donor town education funding model through SWEP, notwithstanding some of the modest increases in deductions, will drive residents from ours and other similarly situated communities. In any municipal election, you speak to a lot of people. I love meeting new people and hearing their stories, but I hate hearing a familiar refrain of neighbors that don't know what to do because of the property tax. In a year when a budget might go up 1% to 2% due to the downshifting of state responsibilities, some tax bills would go up 20% to 30%. Why? Valuations. You might point out, as some have, Declan, increased valuations means lower tax rates. The whole reason we are here is that Portsmouth has a lower tax rate than other communities. That type of logic is what I call halfway there. If you look at the rate and not the valuation, you miss what is driving the pain. Because of the comparable home sale appraisal method, your tax rate can and often will fall in property-rich areas, only to see your taxes rise when similar homes sell. This similar appraisal method required by the state in order to fulfill our assessment duties means that when a house in a neighborhood sells at an increased value, it will cause other houses to be assessed at higher values, which results in higher taxes, creating a vicious cycle. Having to replace education funding to the state through the reinstatement of a donor town education funding model will only accelerate this cycle. Many in these communities will be forced to leave, and by their leaving, we'll be losing a piece of our history. There are a few that understand that last point and still shrug their shoulders. Are we supposed to cry for someone's house increasing in value? I hear that a lot, as if our houses weren't places to raise our families, but investment vehicles, frequently in search of ever-increasing gains. Our communities are places to rely on one another, forming bonds and friendships, people we can count on in a snowstorm when our blower dies, as mine did a couple weeks ago. Not just containers for investments, since everyone will sell their house in 4 to 6 years when they maximize their profit and ready to bring their house to a market like a farmer brings their corn. Call me old-fashioned, but I want more than that in a house in a community. Perpetuating a broken system that will one day break for everyone will first destroy communities like Portsmouth. I grew up here. I stayed here. I want to be sharing stories with the New Hampshire I know, not telling stories of the New Hampshire I remember. If you have any compassion for the history and the people that make up each donor town community, if you believe like I do that the strength of a tree is not just new leaves and branches sprouting for sunlight, but also the roots that dig deep into the soil, then I ask you to reject this bill. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. McEachen. Do we have any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mark Manganello from the Department of Education.
Good.
I'm Mark Manganello with the Department of Education. I'm available if the committee has any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can you make some, well, we have Senator Hennessy has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mark, for taking my question. Do you, are you working with the LBA to develop a fiscal note for this bill?
I've reached out to the LBA with some of the, as discussed during the hearing, some of the technical issues. I've reached out to the LBA of some of the challenges I'm seeing with this bill, technical challenges. But the department is still looking at some of the stuff internally, but we reached out to one of the sponsors to talk through some of these technical issues, but they're trying to resolve those to get not an indeterminable amount for 2023.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just in pursuit of the same question, Mark, do you have some sense of when we might expect that fiscal note?
I do not have a timeline for you, sorry.
I think it is a valuable source for us before we conclude our conversations about the bill and determine some next steps.
Mark, do you have any suggestions, observations that you'd like to share with the committee?
Yeah, some of the technical challenges is, and Representative Luno mentioned this in his testimony, is it was Section 5. One of the main hangups is when you look at Section 5 and you look at C, you bring in the local tax rate into calculating the grant amount, and that's kind of a moving target. So the local tax rate would be different in the beginning of the state fiscal year than it would be at the end of the state fiscal year. So it creates some movement in the calculation. And it's just different from what we're used to seeing, and it's potentially creating some technical hangups as far as, is the tax rate going to be this moving target, or is it going to be something that's set in time at the beginning of the state fiscal year? So we make a grant calculation and then we pay off that calculation throughout the year, or is it going to move? So that's one of the technical issues that I was struggling with.
And
thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Senator Khan.
Mark, we had the opportunity of working with you in this last legislative session. I found you're a pretty talented person. You think that challenge can be solved by the the good minds at the Department of Education and LBA?
Yeah, I think it just needs a little bit more talking through it as far as the technical issue with that clause of the formula, and then some of the other sections of Section 5 potentially add a little bit of ambiguity that would require maybe some more dialogue with the LBA, the DOE.
And I assume that as you go through that, you'll be taking some notes so that as you come back to the committee, you might be able to point out where wording could be improved to assist with the replication of this type of funding process over time.
Yep, I can provide some of that information or some of that analysis or what I'm seeing from a technical perspective from the DOE's end.
Yeah, I think it would have been remarkable to get this 100% correct in the first try. So your assistance would be appreciated. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mark. Do we have any other hands up?
If there's anyone else who wants to speak to Senate Bill 158, please raise your hand now. And if you're on the phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. We have Eric Frauworth.
Thank you. Good morning.
Mr. Frauworth, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Eric Frauworth. I am the administrator for the Bureau of Career Development at the Department of Education. And I would like to speak a little bit on this bill. During the commission meetings, I understand that adding career and technical education was discussed as one of the differentiated aid categories. But I notice in this final bill that you're discussing now, it does not include it. And I did a quick word search of RSA 193E, which covers adequate education. And it reveals the appearance of the following terms. Computer science appears twice. Mathematics appears 4 times. Science, 6. Language, 7. Career, 10. While this may not be a direct correlation to the intended significance of the terms, the fact that career appears more than any of the core academic courses is certainly an indication that the draft preparing New Hampshire students for a career was a vital component of an adequate education. As such, I would ask that this committee consider the inclusion of differentiated aid for students participating in career education programs. As many of you are aware, I hope, currently the tuition and transportation allocation in the budget is directed solely at students attending CTE from non-host schools. This represents only 29% of students participating in CTE. So what that means is the host high school, on an average, is covering 71% of the cost of CTE. And like ELL and special education, CTE programs are substantially more expensive than traditional education. And the schools are doing this with no additional state support. In some school districts, such as Rochester, this figure is as high as 98%. Which means 98% of the students participating in CTE at the Rochester facility are from Rochester High School. So Rochester is footing the entire bill with no state support. So again, I would ask that as you debate this bill, you discuss the possibility of adding differentiated aid for students participating in CTE.
Thank you, Mr. Frauworth. I do believe that on Thursday we have a bill 148 FN is talking about legislation relative to vocational and career education. So that might be a place where you might want to take a look at.
Thank you. Senator Khan.
Madam Chair, might I ask a question?
Certainly.
Of Mr. Frauworth. Mr. Frauworth, it's also true that about 71% of the enrollment in CTEs is coming from host schools, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, the funding is essentially following the student, right?
Oh, well, currently there is no funding for that 71% of the students. The tuition and transportation money is only allocated for students who are coming from sending high schools.
The funding that schools get is within the ADMA, or the cost of a student, whatever the funding is per student, right?
Yes. However, so say, let's use Rochester as the example. If a student from Dover is going to a program at Rochester in CTE, the town of Dover sends 25% of the added tuition for CTE, and money from a separate state account covering 75% of the added CTE tuition is then sent to Rochester. But if a student comes from Rochester, Rochester foots the entire bill for that added cost of CTE education.
So I understand. I think the idea behind that is that if Dover is sending a student to another school for their education, they're contributing something to that other school's costs. The other school is serving that student through its cost structure. You're probably aware that by going to the education cost model, Rochester is one of the school districts that does underspend on average per student, and that it indeed should receive a better distribution of the state's funds if we were trying to provide greater equity. I just wanted it to make sure that that's something that you've seen in the report, that I mean, many of the hosts of CTE centers are in school districts that don't spend at the average spending levels of the state.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Fryworth.
Thank you.
If I was to ask one more, Madam Chair, it'd be that.
One more.
All right, and the governor's level budget, and is there any increase for CTE between the current year and fiscal 22?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so those rates for transportation and tuition, they're still frozen at what the current biennium's level is.
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Any other raised hands?
Not at this time.
Well, in view of that, I think we probably can end the hearing on Senate Bill 158. We have some time left over. Would you like to go into executive session? Senator Hennessy?
I'll make a motion to move into executive session.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Senator DeShardi. We need a roll call, right, Sonia? Okay. Senator Hennessy?
Yes.
Senator DeShardi?
Yes.
Senator Khan?
Yes.
Senator Prentice?
Yes.
And Senator Ward, yes. I like to take up two bills that I think we can. I like to take up 81 and 108.
Uh, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I remember 108 from last week. And 81, I'm
81 had to do with the charter schools and being able to rent or lease space in public schools.
thank you.
Okay, let's start with 108. Obviously, there were a lot of things that came up in the hearing. And at this point, having looked at all of those things, I think it's what we need to do is to re-refer that bill for further study. I was actually asked by the one of the members of the team that came up with this bill. They really felt that they needed to talk more to the police section of the committee. They felt they had not adequately explored that area of the group of people who are intimately involved with the school resource officers and asked for some more time. So my motion at this time will be to re-refer 108. Senator Hennessy?
I'll second your motion, Madam Chair.
Second or motion? Oh, yes, I made the motion. You seconded it. Okay, good. Senator Khan, did you have something to say?
I was going to second your motion.
Oh, okay, great. So we have another roll call. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes,
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
and Senator Ward is yes. So that's 5-0 to re-refer. And the committee members really wanted to do some more work, so that's a good thing for them to have some extra time. And on 81, having to do with the relative to charter public school use of school district facilities, in spite of the fact that I talked to a number of people, it still is not really clear what the situation is like in New Hampshire. So I think we need some more time on that bill as well to further explore what is available in New Hampshire and how it should be handled. So my motion is that we refer that bill as well. Do I have a second? Second by Senator Hennessy.
Second,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Roll call. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
yes,
Senator Prentice,
Prentice, yes.
and Senator Ward is yes. So that's 5-0. Now, Sonia, do we need to put this on the consent calendar?
That's your call.
I would move consent.
I'd second.
Great. On both of them?
Well,
On,
yeah,
on
I was
81?
speaking of the motion we've just considered, but
Okay, that's 81.
Yeah.
Let's put that on the consent calendar. Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
yes,
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
and Senator Ward is yes. So that's 5-0. I can take it out, Sonia. Or Ava, whoever writes it down.
That's perfect. And then Senator, so I'll note that for Senate Bill 81, that you'll take
Yes.
that out.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to mention Senate Bill 108, we didn't say who was going to take that one out.
Well, we didn't put it on consent either, right?
Oh, right, no.
Okay. So are you willing to put 108 on consent? Senator Hennessy?
I'll move consent and I'll also be happy to take it out.
Excellent. So consent, Senator Hennessy,
Do we have a second? I'm sorry. So we had a first and a second on consent for 108.
I'll second it.
Okay.
So Senator Hennessy,
Yes.
Ricciardi,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
yes,
Senator Prentice,
Yes.
Senator Ward, yes. So 5-0 on consent, and Senator Hennessy will take it out. Excellent. Okay, that's 2 minus for us. I don't have anything else that I wanted to discuss today or take up, unless any one of you has something special. So then I'll move to go out of executive session. Senator Hennessy, second, Senator Prentice. All those in, look, you know, yesterday at a meeting, the chair said that he had learned that you didn't have to take a roll call. If you could see the people that could just raise their hands and they will be fine. But I guess we haven't come to that yet. So Senator Hennessy?
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi?
Yes.
Senator Khan?
Assuming Senator Prentice doesn't have any further discussion, I'll vote yes.
Okay. Senator Prentice?
Yes.
Good. And Senator Ward? And that concludes our hearing on 145 and 158. Senator Hennessy?
I'll make a motion to adjourn, Madam Chair.
Excellent.
I'll second it.
Second. Ricciardi will second it. Okay, Senator Hennessy?
Yes.
Senator Ricciardi?
Yes.
Senator Khan?
Yes.
Senator Prentice?
Yes.
Senator Ward? Yes. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Was a very interesting session.